And yes, I'm up at 6 a.m, but I'm not going to write a Twitter stream about it, don't worry.
Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. I'm your host, Rosie Gilmoss, and joining me today as a co-host is...
Jonathan Gilmoss. Hi, everybody.
Welcome back to the podcast, John. It's lovely to have you on again.
It's lovely to be on.
For those people who are maybe new to the podcast and have joined a little bit later in, these episodes tend to be a little bit lighter on the feels. I can't guarantee that every time, because sometimes we do end up going a little bit deep into topics. We tend to sort of reflect on Monday's episode, give you a little bit more information on things we might have gone off and researched into, and you get a little bit of an insight into our own widowed lives. Now, one thing I did want to just sort of mention is the fact that we are both around 5 years into this. So where we are in this, journey, in inverted commas, is very different to where we were 1, 2, maybe even 3 and kind of up to 4 years into it. So if you are still in what we lovingly refer to as the fried chicken and wine stage, please don't think that, Wiz go, you must meditate, you must do this. It's not a must. It's more of a kind of sharing things that we are finding work, isn't it? It's sort of a sharing of knowledge, I guess, rather than preaching, because, my God, we did a fair few years of the fried chicken and wine, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, most definitely.
So, equally, if you are struggling and you are wanting to kind of get out of that stage, do reach out to us, because we would be very happy to give you some signposting and also to listen to you. So don't be afraid to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. But anyway, back to the matter in hand. Monday's episode, we had Emily joining us all the way from the US of A. And it once again was an incredible episode. I know that you felt particularly moved by this one, didn't you, John?
I did, yeah. There was a couple of things that she that really stuck out to me. One is what a man.
Yeah.
What an absolute legend of a man. Like, is there anything that man couldn't do?
I know.
From pruning gardens to teaching undergrads and doing studies into alcohol and addiction, and still keeping it all going, up until days before he died. Like, unbelievable. But it just shows that, sometimes you have a passion and you have to go with it.
Yeah, the episode title was actually Brilliant AF, isn't it? Which Emily chose, and I think it beautifully describes the man that she told us about during the episode.
Yeah, there's a few things that really stuck out to me on this, and one that took me back to, Sarah's battle, for want of a better word. I know I don't really use that term, but it was this surgery option and how he refused it. I remember having this conversation with Sarah Riley Stark, because one of the doctors at the hospital came in and was like, there's a surgery for this. To which Sarah picked up and she went, what do you mean there's a surgery? Oh, yeah, it'll involve 2 surgeons working on you at once, and you'll be down for about 16 hours, but
Jesus.
There's definitely a surgery, and it can be done in a specialist centre up in Birmingham. So, we giving people this hope at the start, and then, of course, I went and did some research onto the surgery, and what I eventually found out was, basically anything that the tumour touches, they were going to cut away, and her post-operative survival rate was 6 months, and her quality of life would have been absolutely smashed to the floor. She'd been wheelchair bound, fed through a tube, specialist meals, and that's not what she thought it was. She thought she could just have the surgery and it would be gone. But this was like quite a brutal thing to do. And in the end, the consultant that was in charge of our case, I think he contacted something like 150 different surgeons across the world. And there was no one that could do anything until the chemotherapy was successful, which of course now we know it wasn't. So I totally understand the conclusion that Emily came to after she went through with her mum, understanding that while the surgery was an option, it wasn't the panacea that they thought it was going to be. And that stuck quite deep, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that is really difficult, isn't it? Because poor Sarah, to be given what she thought was a lifeline, and then to find out that it wasn't what she hoped it would be, that must have been absolutely devastating for her and for you. That must have been a really difficult conversation to have, to explain that actually it wasn't a viable option.
And the problem though was, it's because she was on an emergency ward, you didn't see the same doctors. There was different
Right.
people coming in with a sheep herb, said, like, oh, I know someone who can fix this. You don't want to do it now, you want to do it that. And it was very early in the diagnosis, like very, very early. And the conflicting message that came out, I mean, it didn't change anything. It didn't stop the treatment that she was getting, because her consultant's in charge was in charge of
Yeah.
that. But it certainly muddied the waters.
Sort of speaks about the importance of consistency and continuity in care, doesn't it? And then
Yeah.
we all know that people just that medical stuff, they just don't have time to read all the notes in depth. It's
No, I used to have a little laminated crib sheet that I took in with me every time she went into A&E. I think I've told you about this
you
before.
have. I think it's so sweet.
Just because I got so sick of every time we attended A&E, because she'd had a reaction or something like that. They wanted to re-diagnose the cancer, and it took so long. So it was a way to cut through the chaff and get to the treatment, so to speak. And most of the time it worked. Sometimes they just disregarded me. But they're busy people. It's an A&E department. I don't know that. I'm playing to them. But yeah, that struck quite deeply with me, because it was a memory that I probably not really thought about in a long time.
This is the thing with these conversations, isn't it? Because you end up kind of going back into a time that, although you think it's absolutely seared into your mind, of course you forget little details. Of course you do. Who remembers, intricate details from 5 years ago? And sitting in and listening to these conversations, you do sometimes go, oh God, I'd forgotten about that. Or, oh my God, I'd forgotten how awful that was. And it does make you kind of go back in and reflect on your own grief, I guess. But I don't necessarily think this is always a bad thing, because we found that it's kind of, I don't know, causing us to process some feelings that we'd locked in quite tightly. One of the other things that really stood out to both of us from Emily's episode was this idea of legacy. Now, those of us who have children, I guess we have a sort of built-in legacy, don't we? Because they are walking around looking like little miniature versions of their dead parent, which is a blessing and a curse, depending on what mood you're in. But also, for many of these people, they have left a wider legacy, should we say. I'm thinking of Belle Babe, look at the legacy she left. And many of our tribe have done, perhaps not such public successes or achievements, but they have done many things within their communities or in the wider world. And that legacy will live on long after they did. And that was something that Emily spoke about quite a bit, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it was a year or so after he'd passed away. She got a call to say he'd been co-authored on a paper he'd been working on prior to his death. And how incredible is that, just to get a call out of the blue and say, your late husband's research is getting published again. And it made me interested in, like, how do we look after their legacy? Because we are a bit of a steward for their legacy. And some people set up charities, some people do work for charities.
Some people run marathons, John. I don't know if I've mentioned this.
Well, you haven't mentioned that. Which one was it? The Manchester one, did you say?
It was, yes. Let's just not discuss the time. Keep that under.
It doesn't matter. You did a marathon.
Did not ran. Well, it's funny. I was in the jewellers the other day, and it was whilst I was looking to. I'm having my wedding and engagement ring from Ben made into a piece of jewelry. I think I have mentioned this previously, and the jeweller. The husband and wife team, actually, and he came down and he said, and he was just talking to me, and I sort of explained why they were so important, because obviously I'm handing over something that I can never replace. It felt quite, and I just sort of explained the situation, and I probably blurted out more information than he needed, but that's who I am. And he sort of looked a bit quizzical, and he said, was it local where he was diving? And I said, oh, well, sort of, it was Dover. And he just looked, he went, did he have a wood flooring business based out in France? And I was just like, oh my God, yes. Anyway, it turns out that this guy's best mate used to dive with Ben, and it was a real face tingler. But it was lovely, because he said they still talk about Ben very fondly. I don't know, that gave me some comfort, because I met somebody that I had no clue had a connection to him. And I mean, that is not the same as, a published paper, but it's still the feeling of them existing in some way out in the world. And I think that's why we find that we often sort of wish them happy birthday on Facebook. And prior to them dying, I always thought it was a bit weird. Why would you say happy birthday to a dead person on Facebook? They can't see it. But I now realise what it is. It's so that people that know you and knew them or know of them will see this and kind of go, oh, and just have, a couple of minutes of thinking back to them, because they're so prevalent to us. And it's lovely to think that other people take that time and remember them, I guess. We should probably chat a little bit about our own weeks and things that have been going on for us, because I do think it's quite important to be honest with the listeners and just kind of create a sense of community by sharing what life is like for us at the moment. I think the most part, it's pretty good, isn't it?
Yes, really good.
We've, as you may have seen on the socials, we have bought ourselves a Lumin cold therapy pod. Is that the right word? It looks like a sort of tall paddling pool, to be honest with you.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's like a So you just fill it up from the tap, and then and it sits at about 13 degrees at the moment, and then gradually you kind of lower the temperature with ice, which I have to say we've not got to yet, but we have successfully, both of us, not at the same time, it's very small, sat in this for 10 minutes at a time. It's not pleasant, but what I didn't realise was how valuable and how powerful looking at this cold tub of water and thinking, I don't want to get in that, but forcing yourself to get in it, you're fighting that fight or flight response. And I believe the theory behind it is that it can help with anxiety and trauma and mood and depression, all the good stuff, as well as having sort of physical benefits as well. And I do think that there is a real power in pushing yourself to do something that is not harmful, but it's uncomfortable. So by sitting there, and again, look at me, I'm preaching the Zen life, but I do put on a 10-minute meditation because it distracts me from the fact I'm sitting in cold water. And at the end of it, get out, hot shower, and the feeling that kind of goes through your body as it comes back to temperature is mental, isn't it? It's the closest thing to being high that you can do without being high. And you just feel like a unicorn. And you've been doing it this week as well. You found it really, really helpful, haven't you?
Yeah, well, so one of the things I've been struggling with, and I bleed onto you quite a lot, is this getting started, going out and doing stuff. And, I want to get out of my, COVID-induced semi-retirement, because, 3 years, and get back to doing some real work. But it's been very, very difficult since COVID to get going again. And I've been doing this, and I think I'm tomorrow's a week of doing it every single morning. And yes, I'm up at 6 a.m, but I'm not going to write a Twitter stream about it, don't worry. But I just wanted to see the impact of what it did, and what I found is my phone hardly gets touched. I'm getting all the jobs done I want to get done, and I feel a bit more like what dare I say, like I used to do when I was, working, way before any of this even came into my life. So I'm going to keep on going until not. And some mornings I like you said, I look at it and go, oh, doing. But then when I come out the other side and I'm warmed up and I'm having my cup of coffee as a treat, I feel amazing and I feel great. But it's not, it's not for everybody. It's you're throwing yourself into cold water.
You are very much get up first thing and do it, aren't you? Whereas I like to get up, take the little one to school, walk the dog, come home, and by that point, I'm normally able to just kind of prance about on the spot a little bit, going, I don't want to, and then just get it done. And I am seeing some definite benefits, I think. I mean, it's only been, I think, about 6 days too. So, however, one thing I did want to talk about is sometimes nothing works. And these kind of blobs that I did, of the pillars of mental health and healing, they're all really, really valuable and they do work, but they're not all powerful they can't fix everything. And sometimes you can do every single one of those. And I did on Monday, I did the cold bath and the hot shower, the exercise, the dog walk. I had plenty of, as my friend calls it, blue and green. So sky and greenery. And I just couldn't shake it. I was just really, really kind of sad and angry and snappy at the children and just really not comfortable in my own skin, for want of a better word. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I was doing a bit of sort of, staring at the wall, and you came up to see how I was, didn't you? And I know how it felt for me, because I just sort of sobbed, like, the really loud, like the really cathartic, deep sobs that you don't do very often. And you very lovely kind of helped me while this happened. And afterwards I felt lighter and I felt freer. And in the morning I'd felt a little bit sort of, lump in the throat, but I had quite a lot to do and I didn't really sit with that feeling. And I wonder if that was it, if it is just as simple as releasing the valve on those emotions when they come in, and then you kind of go about your day. But even with the knowledge and the experience and the kind of reading and research that we've done, sometimes you still forget that.
Yeah, that's what I think. Because I've been going quite deep into the science of all this. But don't worry, listeners, I won't bore you with that today. That's probably for a dedicated episode. But one of the things he says is part of the path to healing and self-love and all the rest of it is the routines you put in place to keep it going, keep the 80% going, but then you have this 20% of like real emotions, and they're valid and they're real and they still come, but the intensity and the frequency at which they come at you differs and changes over time. And the more, if you try and squash it down, it'll come back at you 10 times as hard. If you have the opportunity and you can sit with it, and then let it, and then release it through crying or whatever manner, then it generally resolves, goes back into itself. But it's like tidying out your sock drawer and putting it into order. Rather than being a mess, it's quite tidy in there.
Yeah, like little files, isn't it?
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is sticking with your grief, because it is such a flaky saying, and everyone's like, "What do you mean sit with your grief?" And it's a case of you understand you're sad, you miss your person, and that's okay. So you just sit and think about it. And now, one of the things I've recently learned is to then try and vocalize it into the world somehow, whether talking to a friend, talking to a therapy, or even if you are that way inclined, writing it down, because a way of taking that feeling out of your stomach and your mind and projecting it into the real world, it does something in the brain. I don't know what it does, and then you just knock these little things off, and then over time, and it could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be a month, it depends how you're built and everything else. Like most of the time you feel generally calm, but then every now, like you tell them, you wake up and you just like, I don't like this, and you just feel off, and just accept it and go with it.
Yeah, see, I forced myself to go to a children's party, which was probably unwise, especially as you'd offered to do it. But it sometimes doing stuff that you don't want to do and is uncomfortable, especially if you're feeling really kind of low and sometimes really angry with the world. It's really difficult, because you have that dilemma of, I know what will be better for me, but also in this case, I wanted to be there for my daughter. I wanted to take her to the party. So it's a real conflict. And when you're widowed, and particularly if you're solo parenting in this, you do feel that you kind of don't have a choice. And I actually spoke to my own counsellor about this on Tuesday, because I wanted to find some coping strategies for when you do have to push yourself to do things that make you uncomfortable. And her advice really was quite simply, it was just make sure that you have time the other side to recuperate. Something that I use sometimes are those little ear loops. They just take down the volume a little bit, or the more recent versions of the Apple AirPods, they have noise cancellation. Now, I use them because I'm neurodivergent, but lots of people use them as well, just to take away the external noise if you're trying to deal with internal noise in your head because you're processing stuff. So that's maybe one thing you can do, or send up a white flag and ask for help. Most people do want to help. And actually, even 5 years in, I sometimes do still ask for help. It's okay to do that. You don't have to be
Yeah.
completely self-sufficient.
Yeah, just because you're healing doesn't mean you're going to be healed.
No, and
It doesn't end.
and what you said about real emotions still exist and they still are valid, and that's completely true. And you are allowed to sometimes be angry or upset, or I don't know, any of the big emotions. And I think we get quite frightened of big feelings. We get quite frightened of letting them out because it shows vulnerability. And quite frankly, I think we get a bit scared that if you start, you won't stop. And actually, if you do let it out incrementally, then it's much easier to pull it back again, if that makes sense. So you're not going to be on the floor howling for 3 hours. But you might have 3 minutes of kind of intensive crying,
Yeah.
and then you feel so much better.
And it also falls into another one of your posts this week. This will pass. It always passes. You don't stay bawling your eyes out. You might have done it for 2 months every day.
Yeah.
But it did stop.
Yeah. And I know now that when I sort of suffer with my mental health and I get low, what used to take me 2 days to recover now can take 2 hours. So 2 hours is much easier to manage than 2 days. And you said to me on Monday, you just said to me, remember, this will pass. It always passes. And it just stuck with me, and it really helped it to lift. So that is one thing I do want you to all remember, is these big, scary, horrible feelings, they do pass. But they might come back again, but they do, each time they do pass, and each time they should hopefully gradually get a little bit less unbearable. But talking about it is really the answer. And as Jon said, even if you need to just write it down, that sometimes is absolutely enough. Actually, going back to the children's party, which was a very lovely party, I was talking to somebody, and the conversation of how many children do you have came up. I said I would say I have 4 children, and she asked me their ages, and people kind of wince a bit when I say how close together they are. So then I always feel compelled to explain that they're not all biologically mine. One is, I often say adopted because I find it's a shortcut. And, you adopted. Long story short, she got the full song and dance. And she looked really kind of shocked. And I said, oh, sorry, I've just dropped this on you at a children's party. It's the world I live in. It's not a taboo subject. I forget that it is about the people. And she then told me that one of their friends had married a widower. And I thought, oh, brilliant, do you want a business card, But she then said, it was really strange, though, at the wedding. Everybody sort of found it really weird because he talked about his late wife. And I just thought, oh, my God, you've got no clue, have you? Of course he did. Of course he talked about his late wife. And it just made me realise how much kind of misinformation about what happens when somebody dies is out there, because they don't, literally they cease to exist, but they don't cease to exist in our minds and our worlds. They are very much still present. So, so thank you to all the people that listen to this who aren't widowed, because you are doing an enormous service to our community by enlightening yourself and learning about what it really is like to be a widow.
Yeah, it seems that the general social convention is once you die, no one talks about you anymore. You're gone, which we all know is unhealthy for children, unhealthy for families, unhealthy for everybody.
Yeah, but God forbid that you meet anybody else, though. You can't do that.
Yeah, you've got to be. What? No, once it's one and done, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to go again.
Anyway,
but hopefully our listeners, the not widowed listeners that are out there, are going to champion it, and hopefully this narrative will change.
And if you would like to read a little bit about our patchwork family, we are featured in Woman magazine this week. It's the coronation special episode, so you won't miss it. And we're on the same page as Rio Ferdinand. And so if anybody knows him and can put a word in for the podcast, you know what to do.
Yeah, come on, Rio. We're waiting for you, man.
Anyway, everybody, thank you ever so much for listening. We will be back with you on Monday with an episode from another American, actually, called Elizabeth. So I hope you'll join us then. But for now, just be kind to yourselves, everyone. Take care.
Goodbye.